Hi, my name is Edgar, and along with Diego, we'll be presenting our experiment titled Refractive Index and Concentration Analysis using a handheld refractometer for our CHEM 400 class. The main purpose of this experiment was to get hands-on experience using a handheld refractometer and to understand how refractive index changes as the concentration of a solution changes. Throughout this experiment, we focus on learning how to properly use and calibrate the refractometer, prepare chemical solutions using precise mass measurements, and collect accurate data. We also created a calibration graph to show the relationship between refractive index and concentration. Another important goal was comparing our experimental results to accepted literature values, especially for solutions like sodium chloride, to see how accurate our measurements were. Overall, this experiment helped us better understand how refractive index can be used as a reliable method for determining concentration in a chemistry lab.
Before our experiment, we learned how the handheld refractometer works and the role that each component plays in the process of refracting light. A handheld refractometer measures how much light bends or refracts when passing through a solution. The prism and daylight plate create a boundary line on the internal scale, and the refractive index is read where the light and dark or white and blue boundary meets the scale. A higher solute concentration means greater light bending, which equates to a higher refractive index. The instrument must be calibrated with distilled water before and after each use. For our experimental procedure, first we measured the refractive indexes of 11 known solutions. We calibrated the refractometer with distilled water, prepared all the samples at room temperature, then placed a drop of each of the solutions on the prism and read their refractive indexes. We recorded these with correct significant figures and took a picture of each sample. For part B, we focused on measuring the refractive index of different concentrations. First, we prepared 5 sodium chloride solutions with 0 to 25% mass by measuring the solute mass and total solution mass. We mixed these until they were fully dissolved and allowed each to reach room temperature. We measured the refractive indexes and created a refractive index versus percent mass graph to compare the correct literature values. We chose one unknown solution, which for us it was Kool-Aid, and prepared 5 additional solutions with the same 0 to 25% mass. We then measured each refractive index and created a second calibration graph for comparison. After calibrating the handheld refractometer, we measured the refractive index of 11 different solutions shown on this slide. These include the apple juice, ketchup, sodas, milks, pickle juice, and more. Some solutions we needed to dilute, including the ketchup and hot sauce, in order to read the value on the refractometer. Some takeaways were that the solutions with sugar and acid generally produced a higher refractive index. The substances that required dilution with deionized water resulted in a lower refractive index. For example, the ketchup needed to be diluted because it had too high of a concentration by itself, so there was no blue showing up on the lens of the refractometer. Although after dilution, the refractive index was a low value of 1.3349 compared to the Martinelli's apple juice, which didn't need to be diluted, but it had a refractive index of 1.3570. The relationship between concentration of a solution and refractive index is further experimented on in Part B. In Part B, we measured the refractive index of 5 different salt solutions, using 100 milliliters of water for each, and increasing the mass of salt by approximately 2 grams each trial. The percent by mass of salt ranged from 0% to 10%. These values were plugged into a refractive index versus percent mass graph, along with the 26 correct values for comparison. As shown by the graph, the R-squared value for the correct refractive index line was 1, while the R-squared value for the experimental line was 0.998, showing that they were increasing at a consistent rate with little variation. These slopes were also similar, as the experimental slope was only 0.11 times 10 to the negative 3 above the correct slope. To further compare the values of experimental versus correct refractive index, I first plugged the experimental percentages by mass of salt into the correct refractive index equation to get theoretical refractive index values, which I then compared to the experimental refractive indexes for each trial by calculating the percent error for each. These values were extremely similar, with the highest percent error being 0.0748% and the lowest being 0%. A potential source of error may have been a loss of mass in the measurement process, which may be why the experimental values for refractive index are all at or slightly below the correct value for salt. For our unknown substance, we chose Kool-Aid and dissolved it in 5 different solutions using 100 milliliters of water and increasing the mass of Kool-Aid by 2 grams each trial, just like the salt. As we added more Kool-Aid powder, the solution did appear to be slightly darker red color. I drew a diagram because we neglected to take pictures during the lab. For the refractive index measurements of Kool-Aid, the resulting slope from the graph was 1.48 times 10 to the negative 3, meaning the refractive index increased at a slower rate as the percent by mass of Kool-Aid increased than that of the salt. This means that the Kool-Aid is less effective at increasing the overall density of a solution compared to salt. The R value was 0.94, meaning the measured values for refractive index weren't as consistent as the salt values. Some potential causes for this may have been an incomplete dissolving of each substance, causing inconsistent measurements. Other causes of error in this experiment include some of the solid being lost in the measurement process, or improper measurement of the water used in each solution. This would change the measured refractive index, which would also change the slope and R-squared values for the graphs.
In conclusion, this experiment helped us clearly see how refractive index increases and concentration increases. By using and calibrating the handheld refractometer, we were able to collect consistent and meaningful data. We successfully created refractive index versus concentration graphs, which showed a strong relationship between the two variables. By comparing our sodium chloride data to known literature values, we were able to verify the accuracy of our results and confirm that our method was reliable. This lab also gave us more practice preparing solutions, analyzing data, and identifying possible sources of error. Overall, it helped strengthen our understanding of measurement accuracy, experimental error, and how the scientific method is applied in real laboratory work. Thank you.